Good morning. Can everybody hear me okay? Great. Thank you for being here for this session this morning. Anybody that's been attending RESO for a little while is probably not surprised to see that I'm up here talking about green data again, building performance data. In RESO terms, this is the property green verification resource and property power production resource fields that we're talking about. We've added some additional fields to the data dictionary to support power storage, so battery installations, as well as some additional data fields that are being incentivized by the federal government to support improving our building housing stock and making them more energy efficient and things. So what does this data really mean in the marketplace? I thought I'd position it before we get into our panel discussion. How many of you were at NAR in Orlando a couple of years ago? A few of you? There was a pretty major hurricane that hit just in that area not long before that specific conference happened. And there was complete devastation to a lot of properties in the area, not just from the wind, but primarily flooding. But there was one community called Babcock Ranch that ended up being kind of a safe haven area. They welcomed neighbors and other community members in because their properties were okay. They survived that extreme weather event. They had solar panels that continued to provide them power. And they sort of market this community as, the home of tomorrow, a new kind of hometown, welcome to a better life. Well, builders all over the country are building properties to be more resilient. If you go outside at all, pay attention to the weather, you may recognize that, our weather patterns are changing. We're seeing a lot more extreme weather events throughout the country. And the biggest impact this has is on our housing stock. And sometimes there's images on the news, maybe one or two properties in an area of devastation have survived that in the wake of that storm. These properties likely have been built to a different standard, a better standard above code, have a building certification. The properties at Babcock Ranch have a green verification type of home energy rating score, or more properly known as a HERS rating. So while not every property in the country has this data available, those that do, it really matters. Sellers have made investments to either purchase a more energy efficient, comfortable, resilient property, or maybe some have made improvements to their own homes to make it more energy efficient and comfortable. So sellers need this data at time of resale to get that ROI of the investments that they've made. And there's more and more buyers looking for this information as part of their purchasing decisions, not only for the health benefits they provide, the resilience benefits, but also a lot of this data comes with estimated annual energy costs based on how the structure was built. So they're able to factor in annual energy cost estimates for total cost of ownership considerations for affordability. We know that's a real challenge throughout the country today. So Earth Advantage built the Green Building Registry. Earth Advantage is a national nonprofit headquartered in Oregon. And the Green Building Registry is, we provide a SaaS service, but we're also an aggregator of all of this data. So we have partnerships with more than 20 different national and regional building certification and energy rating companies throughout the country to bring this data together into a single source for the marketplace. Back in 2017, we were able to, when I was at an MLS, we were able to find solar power data, and I was on stage at RESO in San Diego with Matt Casey of CRS Data. They worked with us to enable the ability to auto-populate that solar installation data using the RESO standards into listings. But the property green verification data wasn't really accessible in the marketplace. So the Green Building Registry is solving that problem by now making access to this data available. And currently we have over 3.1 million records in the Green Building Registry. This data exists all over the country. These properties exist all over the country with this information. So now we're really working to part of our mission is to get this data into listings. Now is the time. Sellers need it for ROI. The appraisal industry needs it for valuations. There's green mortgage products that may be more affordable and unlocking additional opportunities in the marketplace. And without this data, none of that is possible. And we know what's happening in some areas of the country with insurers not insuring properties anymore because there have been so many extreme weather events and the properties are getting devastated. So the constant in real estate is change. Our buildings are changing, our housing stock is changing, and there's more coming from the federal government to incentivize these changes in our existing housing stock. So if you are the donkey chasing the carrots, like we saw in one of the work group posts yesterday, don't be green with envy. Okay, that's my bad joke for the day. Join us at the table now and come feast on these carrots because they're available. The infrastructure exists, we now have data, and it's easy to implement. So while the GBR offers a public-facing website that's free for anybody to access, us.greenbuildingregistry.com, I am joined today by a couple of MLSs that have made a business decision to add the data fields, utilize the GBR web API to move this data around in the systems that their users use. So we will go ahead and get started here. So Allan and Kirk, quickly, before we get started, can you tell us at a high level, like how are you integrating this data for your users?
Yeah, so we have it in multiple platforms. We teamed up with CRS early on this project, and we then moved it from there. We now have it available in our MLS platforms as well, and of course made it available through IDX and other syndication sites. So that's how we have the implementation right now. We do offer auto-population of the data as well, and yeah, now we're just waiting for more and more data to become available and agents to get used to it being in our platforms.
Yeah, excuse me, at Northstar, we have our own ad edit, our own database. So the way we integrated all of this in was we added the green building fields from the RESO standard into our system. And the way it works is that the agent can go in, and if they happen to know all the information and put it into the fields, they're allowed to just go ahead and enter it in like they would at any other field. But we put in a button that is the GBR lookup, and that calls the GBR API. Whatever results it finds for that address are returned to the user on the screen, and there's a single button that says insert into listing. So that's how we implement it. A little bit different, but.
Yeah. Great, and what was the decision process for each of you to decide to add these fields to your system? Because we know everybody loves change, and adding new data fields especially can be a challenge.
Yeah, so the decision, we have had green fields for quite a few years, a limited number of fields, but a couple of years ago I got a call from a broker in our market. Jody is her name, and she's very passionate about housing or sustainable housing, and so much so that she, her and her husband have a community that they developed, which is the first net zero energy neighborhood in the state. And she called me up because she was frustrated. We as an MLS couldn't really represent the neighborhood really well with the fields we had, and she would very much like us to do something about it. And Jody is not alone. I mean, there are a lot of developers that are putting a lot of money into green now, and even homeowners are now spending more and more money to improve their homes. So we thought, yeah, this is important. We want to move forward with this, and we created a work group. Of course, Jody headed that up. And I reached out to Meg at the time and said, we need a little bit of guidance, and Meg joined us for a bunch of calls, and it ended up being what we have today, with the implementation we have today. So, so the decision was not hard. the implementation route we took, like I said before, we started just to make the data available as soon as we could. We went to CRS and they made basically the RESO-defined fields and the GBR fields available to us very quickly. And then we had some more time to prepare our MLS platforms with that. Last year, we went through a significant project, the Go Native project. So we converted our database to follow the RESO standards. And during that process, we of course implemented all the RESO-defined green fields, and we are now mapping into them. So, yeah.
And for us, we also had one of our brokers who was very much behind this. He happens to be on our board, and that doesn't hurt. And he said, well, this is the time to do it. And in 2020, the city of Minneapolis passed a law that said there has to be an energy disclosure on every property in the city, and that's rentals and sales both. So it has to be printed out and available at open houses, for example. And so it's certainly something that's on the mind of our members. And on top of that, our members have said it's important to our clients. And of course, when it's important to the clients, it's important to them and it's important to us.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Kirk, because, I often get asked, well, where does this data come from? Like, how does it come about in the marketplace? So in addition to builders making a decision to build above energy code and using one of the certification bodies in the country, like Energy Star, LEED, HERS, what about our existing housing stock? How do we get information about those? Because those may be even more important because we do have so many old properties in this country. Mandatory policies are emerging around the country. GBR was originally built as that SaaS platform to support the Portland, Oregon mandatory time of listing energy labeling policy. And the RMLS has been using our API to auto-populate that data into listings since 2017. So there's really two ways that this data comes about. By the way, any of you in the room today that want to get an energy audit on your property, the federal government is now offering you a tax incentive to do that. So there's a big focus coming on generating more of this data in the marketplace because we have to start with the data, but the real value comes in being able to get it into usable scenarios and the marketplace kind of understanding the context of what this means on these properties. So I know for myself, I've done improvements on my home. I have a home energy score of 9. And I don't ever want to purchase another home without this information on it. So it's going to continue to grow as well. But I wanted to circle back, Allan, because I know most MLSs have at least some of these green data fields, but the adoption of the RESO standard fields are really important because it also supports the data that's necessary for the downstream part of the transaction. The appraisal industry needs specific data elements to establish the right value for this particular property. And then the lending industry also has their own set of data standards that they're using to evaluate the risk associated with that property, and having this data helps as well. So either of you, with the data fields you had before, did you map any of that data into the new RESO fields?
Yeah, we actually traditionally have had two fields. We had a green building certification. It was pretty basic. It was like, is it certified or is it pending, that type of thing. And we had a HERS score, and it was just the number. And so when we implemented, we put in 16 fields, all from the RESO standard. And we said, all right, well, for those of you that are maybe unfamiliar with our system, we actually have 3 MLS systems that are our front end. So we have Matrix, Flex MLS, and Paragon. And as I'm sure all of you are aware, you can't exactly predict like how that implementation is going to flow. So we made the decision to map, anything that was a HERS score. We used the green building verification field from RESO, and we just chose HERS, and then we use a score field and put that number in. And so we figured no matter which direction that goes, no matter what order we turn it on for which systems, we were covered. And that was very important for us to be able to essentially manage the transition.
Yeah, and we are very similar in that way. We had a few more green fields, but obviously it was very important for us, just for consistency purposes, that we map them into the new RESO defined data set. So that's what we did. Yeah.
Great, and then Sara, for CRS data, you're a property records, tax, information system. So what was the process for you all to add these fields, since you're not an MLS, but you are supporting property data?
Right. So for you, because we get the data through the API, we're not storing the data on any of our servers. So we're making the call when our property report is viewed or when there's a call for an auto pop on the listing. But what you referred to earlier, back in 2017, that data that we did pull in for your MLS at the time, it is stored on our servers. So having those already set up with the RESO standard fields at that time was so much easier for us to build those fields out in our database, create that table. We knew what to expect. You knew what to expect coming back into the listing during the auto pop.
Yep, great. And then what do you do with this data once it's in your system? Obviously, adding these fields to the add edit process is step one so that it can be brought into the system. You're making the space for this data. But what about on property reports, search capabilities, sending the data out in your data feeds to other data recipients? What does that look like for each of you?
Yeah, I mean, for us, we treat it like most other data points we have in the database. We, of course, display it on our reports. I mean, the data is there to be used, right? And so we made it a priority to highlight it on our reports. It goes out in our feeds and are available to whoever needs it, quite frankly, and wants to display it. So, yeah.
Yeah, we did the same sort of thing. We put it into our web API. We chose not to put it into RETS. And so the data goes out. We on the front end systems, we basically went with the guideline of if there's information on a display or report for water information, we also put the green building. So for example, like a single line display, obviously you're not going to put this sort of info in there, but that's the rule of thumb that we went with.
Okay, great. Another question I have, if we look at the RESO Data Dictionary Wiki, there's numbers available at the bottom based on all of the certification analytics data that have been collected that indicate, how many systems have adopted that particular data field, how often it's being used, and looking at that, there's 5 that have like the property green verification type. And nothing, all the zeros for the property power production fields, so to be able to support a solar installation on a property. And I have to wonder, because I know that these fields are being added to your system, so are those fields not being included in the certification process? Just kind of a general question and something for you all to think about, because you definitely want to get credit for having those fields in your system if you have them. So, we would certainly, I've always been an advocate, and I will ask, even though RESO won't, adopt the fields, okay? You don't want to be the reason somebody can't properly market properties and get the data in that they need to get that valuation and potential loan opportunities. So let's switch gears a little bit to the web API, because that's really the tool that we're using to move this data around the different systems to support interoperability and wherever the data needs to go. So we know that not every system today can support API functionality, especially to consume data in. We do get asked on occasion, well, can you just send me an Excel file of this data? And we really can't, because while the certification data itself doesn't change, we have a couple of URLs that in our data set. So in addition to the green verification resource, we also have an energy cost estimate source, and we have a partnership with the Appraisal Institute to provide a pre-filled residential green and energy efficient addendum, which supports the appraisers in your marketplace to establish value as well. So the report for a home energy score or HERS rating, that green verification URL, that remains static as well as the URL to the AI green addendum, but the energy rates are always changing. So those are being updated in this data set as energy rates change. So while the certification of that property is going to remain static until it changes, the energy cost estimates are going to reflect current market conditions and market rates that are in a particular marketplace. So Sara, for you being the point of API integration for the Triangle MLS, how long did that API integration take, and did you run into any complications?
I think, total time was probably less than a week of actual developer time to build that out, connect to your API, and get that into our system. I mean, we had to modify some things in our product code as well. But once we had that set up and tested your API, knew what we needed to pull, and the matching, we do the matching on address, so that's very easy. Less than a week, right, to set it up. To get it into the auto pop, we have a tax API that we use. I mean, that's super easy to do. So those fields are already there from that initial setup with the GBR. From that, though, we've added it for a few more customers. Because it's already set up, it's, we're talking a day's worth of time to get it integrated.
Yeah, for us, probably took a couple weeks to get the GBR API connected to our system. All in, since it was new user interface and all that, maybe 6 weeks for the whole dev cycle.
Okay. And both of you have mentioned that you utilize multiple systems, or you offer those to your membership. How does this data work in flowing into and through those systems to make sure that it's available where you want it to be?
Yeah, so we have 3 platforms that we're using now, Flex, MLS, Paragon, and Matrix. And all data is entered in our MLS data entry or listing manager. And from there, it is simply pushed to the other platforms. Right now, it's primarily through RETS, but very soon, it will be through the Spark API. And that will certainly help us quite a bit.
Yeah, similar for us. It goes into the ad edit, goes into our Polaris database, out through the web API, and it shows up. Right now, we're still finishing the last couple pieces with the Matrix system. It's already on Flex MLS. So, and it's not only one thing I haven't talked about yet, but we just brought in or did a data share with Fargo, and they had 4 green fields. They were all RESO standard fields. And so one of the great things about RESO is that I was able to go in very easily and say, oh, okay, well, we're gonna have the exact same fields. So when we rolled out that project, none of the agents had to get any training because nothing changed. So not only was the engineering easy because they had it set up the same way before they were a data share partner with us, as we now have it, now that we're in the data share. And so from a technical standpoint and a user standpoint, it made it very seamless.
Yep, great. And what about compliance? We all want to make sure that the data coming in is good, that the data going out is good. Are you all doing compliance on this data, and how does the use of an autofill process maybe impact your decisions on that?
Yes.
Are you allowing agents to edit data after autofill?
Yeah, so we do allow them to edit. It's still their listing, and
field, right? So someone could say, I want a HER score of less than 9 in your case, right? But there are other verifications that they don't work off a numeric system. They're a rating. They say it's, gold or platinum or something along those lines, or they might just say certified. And so the way we set up the system is when the user selects what verification type it is, then our UI will display to them either the RESO rating field or the RESO score field. All right, and so on the score, we put in the guidelines. So for example, if the range is 0 to 100, we make sure they don't put something outside of that range. And we have a lookup, drop down that they can select from that's specific to every single type. And that was really an advantage of working with Meg. I actually personally reached out to a number of federal government agencies and said, well, what are the acceptable values for this verification or that verification? And as you would imagine, they didn't reply. So my next email was to Meg, and I said, hey, do you happen to know? And since they have so many relationships, she was able to work with us and say, okay, for this verification, here's what the acceptable answers are. And so it helps keep the data as clean as it can be while still giving the agents the flexibility to do what they want.
And I think that's a clear example of how important it is that we start talking about the ad edit platforms like the conversation yesterday. Because so much of the quality in the data will be, that's where it starts, right? And the more we have access to data like from TPR and stuff like that, again, the more consistent we see the data, and that's exactly what we need.
Yeah, great. So just to circle back on that a little bit, the GBR, I think that same work group meeting yesterday, we were talking about CRUD for the web API, create, read, update, and delete. So we work with, some of our data providers are a little bit larger and more advanced, and they have an API that they send data to us. And so they're able to create and edit those records, and then somebody using our API is really just able to read that data because they're not going to be making any changes to our system from that data. We're partnering with the source of the data, and sourcing this information is, we're all about transparency and making this data accessible to the marketplace. So, but we also put all of the data records through. There's a lot of dirty data in this space, quite frankly. So the data that gets into the Green Building Registry is really good, clean data. We go through an address verification and normalization process as part of bringing the data into our systems as well, because until we have a good UPI that we can universally accept and adopt on all of our property records, that property address is the match point and what everybody's searching on to make these data connections, to attach this building verification data to the property records that exist or are into listings today. So one other thing that comes up with this information is, liability concerns for agents and brokers. I don't want something to automatically go into my listing without being able to know what it is and hopefully understand what it means and be able to provide context and tell that story about this information. So for each of you, how are you handling that in your marketplaces? Like, how do the agents have access to this data before it, kind of gets into their listing?
Yeah, so for the auto-pop feature, they get a chance to review the data before it's actually put into the listing, right? And nothing is published until they have kind of seen the data. So that takes place there. Of course, there's a concern, again, like I said earlier, they're responsible for the listings. But there could be a challenge, maybe not so much with green data, but what if they omit some data that otherwise was available? So those are some of the things that we'll be looking at to see, what can we do to ensure that stuff doesn't happen, right? But again, it goes back to how much control should we as an MLS have of the actual data. Another point I want to make in terms of liability, and maybe this is something that the data dictionary group can talk about, because right now we don't necessarily know the source of the data, right? So as when we heard about the ad edit yesterday, people are pulling in data from all kinds of sources. But once it hits the database, do we know where that data actually came from, right? Was it public records? Was it pulled from GBR? Or where did it came from? And we don't have that today, so nobody really knows. And again, right now,
just to clarify, Allan, though, we source, green verification source and power production source are part of the resources, but you're relating this to other types of data that MLSs make
right.
use.
Any kind of data that we pull in, what is the actual source of that data? And it also just highlights, when you do Autopub, you really have to trust your business partners, right? You have to trust that the data they send us is accurate and reliable.
Yeah, and for us, as I mentioned, the agent goes into the ad edit, they get down to the green building fields, there's a button there for GBR lookup, and then it does the search through the API, returns the results, and they can click the button that says insert into listing. So it's very seamless, they have control over that. And I've heard it not just with green, but in our market, obviously we have a lot of lakes in Minnesota. They like to hear, well, what is a reliable source I can get this information? And with green, that reliable source is GBR. And think about it like, let's take the power production fields. A lot of the agents, we have over 22,000. They might go up to a residential home and say, well, I can see there's a solar panel up there. And when they see the field in the ad edit that says size, they're probably thinking, I don't know, 8 by 10, but it should be kilowatts, right? So that's the sort of thing that we're trying to get out there. It's hard to educate that many, agents and get them to really understand what everything means. Whereas when they can go into a system like ours through this GBR integration, they click that link, they say, that seems right. Yes, I want to insert that into the listing.
And I think you can say that's also underscores the importance of education in the area, because I mean, I talked about Jody earlier, and we have multiple Jodys in our market, but we have 16,000 subscribers. A lot of them do not have the training or understanding of what this actually means and interpret the data. So there's a big educational piece that needs to follow as well.
Yeah, and that's a great point to our closing here with really, the first step in all of this is, data field adoption to support this information, having access to good data to be able to utilize, because I think as more of this enters a marketplace, people are going to become more familiar with it. They're going to be able to have that context around what, the different programs are, and now that we have this data, we can help you determine what programs actually exist in your marketplace, because that list under that green verification type field is pretty long. But I can tell you that not every market has all of these programs active in their marketplace. So we're able to help narrow that list down pretty significantly for you as part of that. And I guess, in closing, access to this data is key. So in addition to the integrations that have happened here, other MLSs are taking an initial step to make their members aware that this data exists by adding a link, a button on their MLS dashboard to our public-facing search site. Prime MLS recently did that on their Relevate dashboard. It's a great introduction for your members. So anybody that uses a dashboard product, it's free, it's easy, there's no SSO required because we don't have login requirements on our public-facing website. So there's never been a more important time for this data to get into the marketplace. Think about the possibilities with it. If it's not getting into listings, it's not going to be available for comps and CMAs. If you use showing services, why not include, as part of marketing of your property, the ability to send out a text message or some type of prompt with those showing communications and that support that these properties are different and that this additional information is available. Hey, did you know that this is a high-performing home? Or there's So, maybe the annual energy cost estimates and things. Think about AI. There's so much data on the reports in that green verification URL that is being unused today. And if we can get more of this accessible in the marketplace, then all of the modern technologies that are happening are going to become even richer with this additional property data that exists, and we really need to get more of it into listings because consumers likely don't have it, and it just helps add additional value to those that know it exists and know how to use it in their marketplaces. So I don't know if anybody has any closing statements.
Yeah, I think I should mention this. For those of you that maybe are familiar with my history in this industry, I used to work at MRIS before it became part of Bright. So this is the second MLS that I put green building fields into. And the first time I did it way back then was probably more than a dozen years ago. And it took us 3 to 4 or 5 months of research to figure out what should we even do. We had no idea. Whereas this time, I just pulled up the data dictionary. I'm like, well, this is pretty darn easy. And so, just the value of RESO being able to at least make my job easier was just quite awesome.
Yeah, great. And now that we have more of these integrations in place, there's code already built. I know Greg at RMLS has shared, API integration code with other interested parties as well. It's super quick and easy, and we're really, if anybody wants to speak with any of us after the session or during break, which I think is coming up now, please feel free to ask, and thank you very much.
I think we can say there are some great white papers available as well. So there are plenty of resources available to get started. And we took advantage of MEC coming out and even to our association and did a panel there. So there are plenty of access to good resources, information. And so,
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.